This video is about the history of the Jeep XJ Cherokee in Australia, and also the Australian perspective on the Jeep XJ and Jeeps in general. The first part of this video is more about the history, and the second part is about the Australian perspective or attitude to the Jeep. So the Jeep XJ came out in America in 1984. It was first sold in Australia in either 1993 or 1994. It was the first Cherokee sold here since the SJ in the mid-1980s. They were sold here up until 2001. The models sold here were the petrol 4-litre AMC Straight 6, which had a 4-speed automatic AW4 transmission, and a diesel that had a 2.5 litre straight 4 and a 5-speed manual. This was the only way to get a manual XJ in Australia. All the XJs sold in Australia were 4-wheel drive and 4-door, so that meant no MJ Comanches either. All pre-update 4-litre Jeeps came with a standard transcooler. A full underbody bash plates were also standard, so that's for the steering arms, for the trans case, and for the petrol tank. There was an update in the US in 1997, but some of the Australian 1997 delivered Jeeps were still pre-updates, but they did get a lot of the electrical components from the update models. The difference between the update and the pre-update Jeeps were the pre-update Jeeps had a fiberglass tailgate, which was replaced with a steel one on the update. The update also got rid of the fake quarter vent windows that were in the front doors. Australian Jeeps never got the real quarter vent windows like the US Jeeps did, they were just fixed closed. Australian pre-update Jeeps had the same tail lights as the Japanese market Cherokees, which were also right-hand drive, which also seemed to be very similar trim to the Australian Jeeps. Updates got new mirrors that were foldable. The pre-update Jeep in this video has got update mirrors fitted to it. Updates also got a completely new interior with cup holders and an electric airbag rather than a mechanical one. All Australian Jeep XJs were built in Ohio as far as I know. The 4-litre Jeeps had a Dana 30 high pinion front and a Dana 35 LSD rear diff. Diesels came out with a Chrysler 8.25 rear diff. 3 different trim levels were offered on the Jeep XJ in Australia. The Sport, which had a factory 2-inch lift, a rear sway bar delete, black flares and grille. They also had 5-spoke steel wheels, which my Jeep has on it currently. The Classic, which had a wood grain dash on pre-updates, but other than that they had the same interior as the Sport. They also got alloy wheels, which were 5 spokes on the pre-updates. The Limited, which my Jeep is, which was the top of the range Jeep, had a leather interior, a roof console, wood grain dash and door cards, a leather wrapped steering wheel, mesh style alloy wheels and ABS, and apparently the ABS front diffs are stronger than the non-ABS Dana 30 front diffs. There were a few factory options that the Australian Jeeps could be optioned with, some being an aluminium rhubar, which the Jeep on the left has. The Jeep on the right has an aftermarket ARB rhubar, aluminium side steps, a spare tyre carrier, but not many were optioned with the spare tyre carrier, and the one in this photo is aftermarket. The rhubar on my Jeep is an American made proto-fab bar. These aren't very common in Australia. This style of rhubar isn't common in Australia at all, but I think it's one of the best bars out there. My Jeep also has the rear 4 windows blocked out with steel plates. This is custom and they were never sold like this in Australia. However, there was a panel van XJ was sold in some parts of Europe and it was a tax dodge. These days the newest XJs are 22 years old, so they are an older model car, which means they need a bit of maintenance to keep them on the road. Some of the common problems with the 4-litre XJs are bad sensors, especially the CPS or crank position sensor. Almost all the sensors on my Jeep have been changed in the last 3 years. Old clutch fans will cause them to overheat and run too hot, so make sure you replace this when needed. It's a good idea to fit a bigger transcooler if you tow or drive off-road a lot. The good thing about the XJ is it's a relatively easy car to work on, and most common problems are easily fixed. One of the big problems with the Jeep XJ 4-litre is the fuel economy. Most 4-litre XJs can get about 12 to 15 litres per 100 kilometres. Mine can do 9.6, but it has been modified to be cheaper on fuel. So most of the Jeeps aren't like that. It's got different injectors amongst other things. Bigger tyres and a roof rack will not help your fuel economy at all. A cage roof rack knocks off 50 k's off my range in my Jeep, so I don't have it on very much. So, is the XJ a good car to go remote places and camp out of? Well, it can be if you have kept it in good condition mechanically and you understand how it works. Parts for the Jeeps are not easily available in Australia, so it's a good idea to carry some spares with you. If you don't already know, Rock Auto is a great place to get Jeep parts, and usually works out cheaper than buying them locally, sometimes a lot cheaper. But you'll have to wait around 2 weeks for the parts to arrive over from the US. So here's part 2 of this video. The general Australian opinion on the Jeep XJ. So in America, the Jeep is thought of as a legendary 4-wheel drive. However, in Australia, they're thought of as crap. But why? Australians are used to Japanese cars, especially 4-wheel drives. And in general, most Japanese 4-wheel drives are built with the same way of thinking. Jeeps are completely different. So if you're used to working on Japanese 4-wheel drives, you'll have to learn a fair bit to work on a Jeep. The way the Japanese think how to build a car is also different to how the Americans would build a car. Funnily enough, most Australian-made cars seem to be like a mix of the two. Now, because Australians in general are not familiar with how to fix Jeeps, they get a reputation of being hard to fix. Then they take longer to fix because the parts have to be ordered in, usually from the US, because they aren't that common here. And a lot of Australians just hate Jeeps because most other Australians hate them, and because it's quote unquote uncool to like Jeeps. So is this a bad thing? Well, yes or no, depending on who you are. If you're on the used market for an XJ Cherokee, it's great, because you can buy a really capable 4-wheel drive a lot cheaper than it should be. 3 of the best hidden gems on the used 4-wheel drive market would probably be the XJ, the ZJ and the WJ, especially in 4-litre. They all have front and rear solid diffs as well. Overall, it's probably a bad thing as less Jeeps are sold new. So the problem of low parts availability and people not being used to working on them will remain. In 2014, a bloke called Ashton Wood from Queensland destroyed his 2010 Jeep Cherokee KK as a publicity stunt. It was a 2.8 litre turbo diesel. The car had 22 problems in 4 years. It was hard to find out what the problems actually were, but 2 of them were the window wipers turned on when the car went around the corner, and it had a leak in one of the fuel lines. The Australian media at the time made a really big deal out of this, and this only made the public's hate for Jeeps in Australia grow even stronger, especially towards the Cherokee models. Since I've started making this video 2 years ago, and yes, it really has taken me that long, there has been a bit of a shift in the public opinion of the Jeep XJ. One of the reasons for this is 4-wheel driving has become a fair bit more popular. And the other reason, I reckon, is a bloke called Tim Beaver, who was a shit poster in a popular Facebook four-wheel driving page called No Need for a 79. The 79 being a 79 series Toyota Land Cruiser, which is one of Australia's most loved four-wheel drives. Tim would always say how a $2,000 Jeep would be a better car for four-wheel driving than a $100,000 79 series Land Cruiser. He eventually got banned from that group, and he made his own page where he is putting his money where his mouth is and building an update Jeep XJ 4-litre which he bought for cheap. So, in the last 2 years the prices of XJs have doubled, but they're still lower than most Japanese four-wheel drives of the era. So, will the Jeep XJ, or Jeeps in general, ever be respected by Australians? That only time will tell.